Good morning, everyone. Mark Westcott here, and today it's our special question and answer day today, and we've got the great pleasure of Vanessa here with us. Jansen, here today with us. I've got to go up with the times, haven't I? To talk about question and answers in regard to financial services, investment strategies, and all those sorts of things. So, welcome, Vanessa.
Thank you, Mark. It's a pleasure to be here.
Absolutely. Yeah, today we've got a few questions have come in already, and so I just want to start with a couple of questions before we just talk generally in regard to what the issues are around most grazing families in regard to getting their financial side of things organised. I guess it's as you know, we help a lot with the estate planning, the succession planning, and so on. But behind the scenes, a lot of people really need help in regard to their investment strategies and setting up what we call silos of wealth off farm. So they're sort of some of the things we'll chat about today. But I guess, Vanessa, if you just want to give us a quick background in regard to what you do and how you're involved in this sort of work, and then we'll fire away with the questions.
Absolutely. Thank you, Mark. And yeah, a pleasure to be here. And hopefully I can add some real value to your clients and give them some some things to think about. So yeah, Positive Dynamics Wealth Management, as Mark mentioned, is our company. We've been in business since 2006, and what we do is we specialise in wealth management. So what we find, people work really hard through their working life, self-employed, many, but others, employed. And, we work really hard to create this wealth, and whether that's passed through generations or not, there's still a big bucket of wealth that we create. And our role is to work in and, make sure, one, for the individual, they're set up really effectively for retirement. So it's about when we stop working on the farm, when we stop producing that income for ourselves, how do we create an income for retirement or semi-retirement or whatever that may look like? And that's important to start planning as early in life as possible. So that's a big part of what we do. It's the strategies and also the management of that wealth.
That's interesting, Vanessa, because that word retirement is a word that most people in rural Australia just cringe at that word retirement. They never want to do it. So everyone wants to go with their boots on.
That's exactly it, and we see that often, and that's what it's about. It's for a lot of families that we've worked with, it's about how do we transition this asset, the farm, within the family, and how do we make sure they've got an income, because sometimes they're taking on some significant debt along with that property, and then how do we create that income, maybe not retirement as it's traditionally known, but just reducing the amount of hours that are spent on the farm and creating some sort of other income so that enables the children to get more involved.
Yep. Okay, well, let's just start with a couple of questions and then we'll get into the more general topics, which I know we're both all over. But the question was, how do you invest off farm? How do people get started? Yeah, I mean, how do people get started by what do they go into shares? Do they go into property? Do they go and buy a warehouse and lease that to the government or something like that to get a guaranteed income? But what are the different ways that people can take the money out of the farm? And if I may put in this question as well too, is there advantage in borrowing against the value of the farm, because farms have big values? So maybe you can throw that in there as well.
Excellent. So I'm going to try and answer all of those in one.
Too big a question for this morning, I know.
Hopefully I don't have a time constraint on the answer to this question. All right. So how do we invest? When you've got this great asset, there's so many different buckets that you could do. As you mentioned, it could be property, it could be shares. The thing is, the key that we see with the success is to create many different buckets of wealth, so many different silos of wealth, because then you're diversified, because we don't have the crystal ball, nobody does, to know which asset's going to produce, the best results. So if we can diversify wealth, we can be confident that when you do want to come and rely on these assets, that you can call on one or the other at a different time. So then we look at the best way to do that, and that is very individual because it depends on a number of different factors. It could be age, wealth, cash flow, so many different factors we'll consider. But if I speak generally, what we'd be looking to do is, number one, we'd go, okay, how do we minimise tax if tax is an issue? And that's where we would be looking at some superannuation contributions. And that's going to be very dependent on age as well. You know, if you're more nearing retirement, maybe in your 50s, we're really going to focus on that strategy, because we know that when you get to 60 and older, retired, this is the only tax-free asset that you're gonna build, like completely tax-free. So that's why we're going to concentrate on building that asset. Then when we're building that asset, there's a few different ways we can do it. You know, one, if we look at the traditional sort of approach, we'd be looking at, you know, an industry fund or a retail fund that's in the superannuation environment. We can still manage that money for the clients. We'll just look at how they, you know, which assets they hold in those funds. So that could be shares, you know, there could be some property, Australian shares, international shares. We'll look at the risk profile, so how much risk someone wants to take. We have some clients that have been really, really concerned with volatility over the last few years. You know, no doubt there's been some really great highs, also some lows. And we've had clients that just even go in term deposits in their super. So it's very flexible. Then the other side of things could be a self-managed super fund. So the reason that you might want to have a self-managed super fund is to actually buy some property with that bucket of wealth that you've created. And then that's also, you know, going to be a tax-free asset when you're retired, 60 and older.
Yep.
And that's where we'll give the advice. You know, again, you want to have some diversification in there. We might have some shares, might have some property, could be a commercial property, could be residential. There's lots of different things that we can look at. So that's one silo of wealth. That's the superannuation. Right. Separate to that, so we're going to always look at that. Then we're going to look at, okay, what's the farm worth? What are your assets worth? And what's the loan to value ratio? So, you know, is the loan sitting at 50% of the value of the property, or what does that look like? Do we have the ability to borrow against the farm? Because if you do, then we're going to look at your cash flow and we're going to see whether you can actually afford to do some investing with that. Because that's a fantastic way to grow wealth. It's a fantastic way to be looking after, you know, children you might want to disperse some wealth to. And we can be looking at a number of different scenarios there. We're looking to borrow for investment purposes. Typically, the most comfortable is for property. And that could be, you know, building something on the existing farm. If you've, you know, got a lot of land, some areas, space that you could build something, create some income off, that's going to be a great, you know, advantage. The loan's going to be tax deductible. It's going to help reduce some, you know, some tax. And yeah, so it could be commercial, residential, on the farm. So many different options.
Yep.
Now, the other bucket of wealth is using an entity. So you might have a trust, you might have, you know, we'll work with the accountant to have the right structure. And if you've got really strong cash flow, we might put some into each of these different buckets, but this final bucket is going to be a share portfolio. And that's how we create that diversification. Because normally we find you've got the farm that's very heavy in that property side. So we might have this other bucket of wealth that's, you know, diversifying into some Australian shares, international shares, and that's where we'll give the advice and work with you on what to do.
Now, Vanessa,
does that answer the question in full, Mark?
Yeah, that's great. That answered all my questions. Thank you very much. But one of the issues is, you know, as you know, and you've dealt with farmers graziers before, is that the whole mindset is in regard to every time they get a dollar, they want to invest it back in the farm. They want to fix up the buildings. They want to put new fences in. They want to create, improve the capital value of their property, because, and in fairness, for many people invested in property over the last few years, certainly, you know, rural properties as well, the values have just gone through the roof. And so it's hard to argue with them sometimes in regard to their, you know, their choice of just hanging onto the property and pouring everything into that. But I mean, as we all know, everything in life has cycles. And whilst the cycles at the moment might be heading towards great values in regard to property, the truth is already all the people I'm speaking to at the moment are saying that the values of real estate, even in rural Australia, has really stalled. So it's just gone exponentially for the last couple of years, but now it's kind of on hold. So this is where it becomes important to have different buckets of wealth, different silos we talk about, and so on as well. But there's one other question before we just go into a general conversation, because there's so much I want to talk with you about. The question I asked somebody recently was, they told me how their property was worth, $30 million. And there's a friend of mine was telling me his property was worth $30 million. His kids aren't coming back on the farm. He had 2 daughters and they're not interested. They and their husbands aren't interested in coming back on the farm. So they've got a $30 million property, and this guy feels very compelled because of the family connections, and granddad was on the farm and so on, that you can never sell the place. And you look at what you earn per annum on a farm that's worth $30 million, and it's probably a good year's salary for someone in the city. Compared to if they sold that property now for the $30 million and invested it, do you have a ballpark? What's a safe figure that you give people in regard to what they can earn on cash at the moment? I'm suspecting it's 6-7% or something like that. Is that a fair figure?
Yeah, look. So if you sold the farm and you've got this $30 million, I can guarantee you that these people are going to have a more comfortable income than they ever had in the past. I know that's not what they're looking for, because they've very much. Sorry.
It's all about they've lived on the farm and that's what they know, and it's
exactly.
all the other reasons.
Yeah. So I can imagine that's a very tough emotional decision. But if they were forced to that point where they need to sell the farm, I know that they'll have a much more comfortable income. They'll be able to look after their family in other ways that they haven't been able to before. But what you'd be expecting to earn depends on the risk that you're willing to take. And I would assume, for most, based off my experience with these sorts of clients, is that they're actually not willing to take a lot of risk. You're not going to go and put it all into Australian shares and international shares. That would be a very nervous ride for farmers, I would say, that haven't really invested much in that area before. So we'd be looking on the other end of the scale, which is more like term deposits and cash sort of products, maybe a little bit of shares. So if we're looking on the really just term deposits, you'd be looking at, a return of about 5%. It's taking the risk, is going to big banks. That's a wholesale rate we can achieve. And then if you just step up a little bit on the risk scale, very easy to achieve a 6 to 7% return. And then the further you go up, we'd be comfortable to say on a long-term average, you'd be getting a 10% return. But I'd say a 10% return per annum is probably a risk that most farmers wouldn't be wanting to take.
Yeah. So 5% really, can't you go to ING and put money in a term deposit ING for 5 or 6%?
Well, it is capped at, Yes, you are right. You can get the ING is the best, product advice here.
I'm not pushing a product. I didn't mean to.
No. But it is capped at $100,000 though. So there are a couple of special honeymoon deals, but they do have caps. When we're talking bigger lump sums of money,
Yeah. What I probably want to say, Vanessa, is that if someone had a $30 million farm, and I run across these people all the time, effectively, just by selling the place and putting the money in the bank, they could get they could keep their capital, get $1.5 million a year, which they could help their kids. They could provide a lot of help for children, grandchildren, school fees, private education, all those sorts of things. And the $1.5 million that they would be earning would be probably 4 to 5 times what they're earning on the farm, after expenses and so on. That's kind of how it is, isn't it?
That's it. I just ran a quick calculation. My brain doesn't work that fast on the calculation. But I was thinking, probably $1.8 million is a comfortable sort of, just drawing out. The capital's not reducing. You've still got $30 million there. You're just taking out the income each year. That's something like $1.5 to $1.8 million. You can imagine the things that you can do with that. There's going to be probably some tax payable, but we'll do what we can to structure it that we can minimize that tax. But yeah,
look, absolutely. But they can help their kids too when they do that, can't they? And I'm not encouraging everyone to go out and sell their properties, but I'm just saying in a lot of cases, I have people that have $10-20 million farms and they're struggling to make a living, struggling to make ends meet. And I just keep thinking, wow, $10 million, you stick that in the bank and you get 5%. There's $500,000 a year income, which they will have never seen before in their lives. And just makes life so much easier, and they can help everyone in their family so much more easily.
There's something else, and I have done some actual seminars just on this topic. I mean, the topic's called Die with Zero, and I'm not suggesting that you go out and spend your $30 million, but part of this topic is about when's the right time to help your children with, that wealth transfer. And there's been so many studies done on this. And, what we see mostly, and if, you're a farmer listening right now, you probably inherited that farm, much later in life, or you inherited the wealth much later in life. That's typical because your parents, pass away when they're 80, 90. And by that time, you're 60 yourself, thereabouts.
Yep.
Once you get to that age bracket, you've normally gone through all of the hard yards. You've raised the children. You've been on the grind. And as well, it's nice to receive that wealth. It doesn't really create a significant, change to your life. Whereas if you inherited that money when you were 30, when you're having children, wife's out busy, raising the children, maybe trying to bring in a bit of extra income, your husband's just working so many hours out to provide for the family. If they were given a bit of money earlier in life, a bit of income or a lump sum, whatever that looks like, their life is going to change significantly. They're going to be able to spend more time with their children, with their parents, have some nice family holidays together. I think they're the sorts of things to think about what you could do with your money. It's not about the money, it's about the life that you can create for yourself and your family.
Absolutely. And you raise a really good point there, Vanessa, and that is, you talk about the average age. The parents are in their 80s, 90s, and the children are in their 60s. Now, when the kids are in their 60s, their children are going to be in their 30s. And traditionally, they're going to be 30, 35. And when that happens, those children are then looking at, okay, can we now have an opportunity for us to start coming in and running the farm, running the business, running the property, and how can you help us? Our kids are at boarding school and all those sorts of things, and that's the greatest danger, isn't it, of parents who hang on too long, and it's not necessarily about passing the asset down to the kids, but passing the opportunity down to the kids, passing the opportunity to run the business, giving them some financial help along the way, because when you've got a 10, 15, 20, $30 million property, I mean, there is enough cash there to help your kids. It's not like you're on struggle street.
And you don't have to give them, I wouldn't be suggesting, and I'm sure you wouldn't either, with many of the clients we work with, it's not about handing the asset over. It's about just bringing them into it. You still have full control. Yeah, so that's...
Well, we're very much about having the parents to continue to own the asset, but the primary real estate, but handing over the business to the next generation so the kids can come in and start running the business. And because they're young, energetic, enthusiastic, and they have new ideas. And, I was talking at a school reunion with a bunch of guys last night, and we were just talking about how when we were kids, farms weren't managed clinically. They were done on what's the weather look like today? How long should we leave the rams in with the ewes? We'll leave them in another 3 weeks. Whereas these days it's just clinical. It's like the bulls go in with the cows for this many weeks, and then they go. And if the cow doesn't get pregnant, she's off to the butcher shop. Everything is so much more clinical. And I mean, and what that means is, and where I was coming from was that the next generation are learning all these sorts of things, learning how to be better farmers, learning how to be better primary producers. And you need to give your kids that opportunity before they're in their 60s to come in and do that sort of thing. but we're digressing a little away from an
And that
investment
has
strategy here. But
no, but that's okay. I think it has an impact, and that's where we come in to make sure that, you know, we've got some clients that are, you know, the age bracket that their kids and their grandkids are, you know, in their 20s to 40s. And what we do is we set up investment accounts for the grandkids, for their kids, and
yep.
The asset's owned by the parents, but the beneficiary is set up as the children. There's some great tax benefits, but it's also about educating the children, the grandchildren, about, you know, other ways of managing money.
Yep. No, very good. Very good. Well, all graziers and farmers need to come and talk to you, Vanessa. You've got some good ideas, and they all need to listen.
Feeds a lot too.
I just want to touch on one of the things you mentioned before, and that was that word superannuation. It's kind of like the retirement word for rural families. They seem allergic to both words, superannuation and to retirement, and yet super, as you said, is one of the, you know, it's the primary tax-free investment strategy. So how do you talk to people who are sort of have an aversion to superannuation and help them to understand that you know, everyone's got a different situation, but generally superannuation should be part of their portfolio of wealth?
That's right. And we do often have, you know, clients that are, you know, of that age where they've been working a long time. They're coming up to retirement age, maybe not retirement themselves, but retirement age.
We'll call it transition age. Transition
age. That's a better word. And yeah, they're not feeling comfortable at all about it. They've never really put any money into the superannuation bucket. I think our role, really important, and this is what we do with our clients, is not to pressure them into setting anything up fast. It's about making sure that they have the right education to really understand what they're doing. So, you know, we might have multiple meetings with clients to make sure that we know that they're comfortable. And, you know, part of making sure they're comfortable, you know, there's two sides of where we see their fears coming from. One is from the investment side, going, well, I don't understand investments. I've never done that before. And that's where we could start with some term deposits in the super fund, or just start layering it up with, you know, some experience. And then the other side of the fear is coming from regulation, government. You know, government's always changing, legislation. And, you know, I agree. You've been around longer than me. You will have seen a lot of change in your time, but I do know that there's no other asset out there that has a better tax structure than the superannuation environment. So if we put some of your wealth in there, it's always going to be a more tax effective strategy than putting it in other places. And that's why we diversify. You know, we're not going to put it all in one bucket. And that normally over time puts people's, you know, fears at ease. And then we normally, you know, I like to think that we're mostly confident in helping the client understand this is actually in their best interest.
Yeah. One of the, Vanessa, great chatting with you this morning. I love your wisdom in regard to these issues, so thank you. But one of the issues that we find is when people come to that transition age, many times they're leaving a commitment on the kids that are taking over the farm to fund their, I'm going to use the word retirement, aren't they? So if mum and dad go and move to the city or something like that, they transition. You know, even if they're living in the cottage out the back of the property, and the kids and all the grandkids have moved into the main house, there's many times there's a commitment from the next generation to look after mum and dad. And the greatest way we can help people is by mum and dad actually having their own little silo of wealth, their own little bucket of wealth, that when comes time to transition, retire, move on, whatever, they're not dragging money out of the family business. They're not dragging money away from their kids and their grandkids. They have actually put their own money to the side so they can have their own retirement. They've got their own house on the beach or whatever they want to do, and they can get on with their life. That's something that I know you help people with.
Yeah, I know that families, you know, young families that come into these assets and they're supporting the parents, that, I mean, they're very grateful for their parents, for the opportunity they've given them. And, you know, there's normally that very strong emotional tie, but they do feel like they've got a bit of a noose around their neck when they need to also support financially mum and dad, because there's just not always enough cash flow to go around to support everyone. So that's where it's so important. I know the fences are very important, and that's always going to be the priority to keep the farm, maintained and, investing back into the farm. But we also need to put a bit of money aside, and that's where we come in to work out what that bucket will be. And when times are good, we might put a bit more into that bucket. And then when times are slim, maybe we don't put anything in at all.
Yeah, gearing to invest has been around for 100 years, hasn't it? And it's obviously profitable to do that. It's people have geared into share portfolios and other everybody gears into a house in their lifetime. They buy a house, and that's called a mortgage.
That's right.
So gearing to invest is something that most people are aware of, used to, and have done. And it's interesting that the rural families all seem to want to put their money straight back into the property instead of using that and leveraging it to create some other buckets of wealth. And that's the greatest learning that I wish we could pass on to rural families, is that opportunity is to create different buckets, different silos, whatever you want to call them, so that everyone has their opportunity for independence also moving forward. And the other reason is, from an estate planning point of view, Vanessa should be aware, is if one of the kids stays on the farm, how do you fund the the benefits from the wealth distribution when mum and dad do pass on? Have you got to sell the farm? What have you got to do? If everything's in the farm, you've got a real problem, and you might have a commitment from the kid that stays there to his other two siblings for the next 20 years. Or if you've planned ahead and created some wealth off farm, it makes it so much easier for the other siblings who are not staying on the farm. So there's a million reasons why creating these different buckets of wealth, silos of wealth, is a good idea, and part of a balanced investment strategy for any business owner, not just rural families, but really anyone.
That's it. Keeping harmony within the family.
That's right. So the kids get together at Christmas as mates. Just one last quick question. We just got a couple of minutes left. I would suspect, in all my previous years in regard to financial services and so on, we always had these graphs on the wall of our share portfolios outperformed everything over 20 years. The shares were way up on the chart. Property was kind of next, and so on. Is a share still a great investment portfolio, investment option for people?
Absolutely. You need to have it in your portfolio. If you don't have it, you're missing out. And I think, just as you kind of highlighted, you probably, if you don't have it, it's only because that's what the family's always done. Now's the time to do something a little bit different. We're not talking anything super drastic. We're just talking about actually increasing the overall wealth through some education and being connected with the right people. So, shares have, outperformed, and I've got so many different charts as everybody else would, but I can actually pinpoint in Australia, I've got some statistics on actual values of land back in, whatever year you want me to go back to, 1980, and we can look at what the land's worth today. That's very easy to look at the valuations on what property sold. We can do exactly the same scenario with Australian shares, international shares, and we look over those timeframes. Both assets have been really great, and that's why we want you to have both assets. But depending on the time frame, we have seen shares outperform the property over those longer periods of time. Yeah.
But all in all, and just finalising everything, Vanessa, thank you very much for your time today. Always great to have you on any of our podcasts and so on. So thank you for coming in today. But I mean, it's all about just making sure you've got a spread of investments. Try not to keep all your eggs in one basket, and the number of reasons as to why you do need to have different silos and buckets of wealth and so on moving forward. But the key thing is, as with playing with explosives and all these sorts of things, is don't try and do it yourself at home. Give someone like Vanessa a call and get some advice, get some professional advice, because it's what you don't know that's always going to help you come unstuck. So if you want to do these things well, make sure you take the time and get proper professional advice. Vanessa, thank you for your time today, and look forward to talking with you again soon.
Thank you for having me, Mark. It's been a pleasure.
See ya.